Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. The Competitive Edge Podcast is proud to have this standout fitness brand sponsor this episode, and we truly believe in their brand and what they stand for. Have you seen those super bright green jerseys that stand out at the races with the cool dog on the front? You can't miss them on race day. Do you know the fastest man in hybrid racing who finishes the assault bike in less than 15 seconds? Or do you know the one team that has 25 DECA World Championship podiums, including 14 first-place podiums in the DECA season of 2023? Yes, that's right. It's a DECA World Champion, Kevin Gregory, and his hardworking underdog athletes. Gentlemen, welcome to the Competitive Edge Podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Hickman, husband, dad athlete, business owner, and hybrid coach. I went from being a former professional athlete to a first-time father gaining weight and losing track of who I was, to an elite dad athlete who completely redefined the meaning of competing as a father. This is your show to learn from me and several other inspiring dad athletes on how to effectively juggle fatherhood, fitness tactics, and mental focus. I'm excited you're here. Let's get started. All right, welcome back to the Competitive Edge Podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Hickman. We have an awesome guest, not a father, but information that is going to be so important for us as dads to be better fathers, better husbands, better humans, living on this earth as long as we can to do the best we can to be better than yesterday. So today we have Dr. Alexis Jasmine Cowan. Met her on Instagram. My wife introduced me to her page, and first we learned about Jack Cruz, so she's kind of an understudy of that. She'll get into that. But, the whole purpose of her coming on the show is so we can learn something about tips and hacks or something that we just don't know. We are hybrid racers. Most of the people that listen to this show are hybrid racers. We are kind of burning the candle at both ends in life to the point, this is the burnout. We're kind of hanging out. If you can see me on YouTube, I'm literally right below it. But I recently personally had a blood test done in the spring, and my vitamin D was down to 20 when I joined Manly, and then after that, I got it up to 37 by moving to Costa Rica for about 3 weeks, and then just prioritizing the sun and my wife getting on me and forcing me outside to see the sunrise and turning my blue lights off, all this stuff. We'll talk about it, but Dr. Alexis has a Ph.D. and she's just been on a tear, sharing everything she's learned and just backs everything with science. So thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to chat about it. And I think there's a lot of misconceptions in the space around like sunlight science and what people actually need to be healthy. And I'm excited to kind of unpack it with you.
Sure, absolutely. So tell us a little bit about your journey, how you got into this, what is fueling you, your competitive edge to continually push this message out to the world.
Yeah, so I had a lot of health issues as a kid. I had a lot of mold in my home. In retrospect, I'm reflecting on like standing water smells. Everybody in my house, including the pets, were like not well. I had recurring strep throat in first grade. I had a lot of dental issues. I had childhood obesity starting around second grade, and that spiraled up to about 270 pounds sophomore year of high school. I lost a bunch of weight over the course of a year. I basically started counting calories and going to the gym every day for like 2 hours and lost 100 pounds. But gained an eating disorder and then irritable bowel syndrome shortly after that, or ulcerative colitis or something in this arena. And that was kind of my foray into my healing journey and understanding what inputs I needed to change in order to create health instead of creating disease like I had been like the status quo for a lot of people around me. And we just see now like chronic disease is kind of the norm, but it doesn't have to be that way. And so I was initially, in undergrad studying biochemistry and math, interested in understanding more about my own health, like for my own benefit, but also to disseminate and help other people. And I ended up going to Princeton starting in 2016, one of the top metabolism research labs in the world called the Rabinowitz Lab. At Princeton, I studied there for 5.5 years. And during that time, I really got enamored with the microbiome and the role of the microbiome in creating health and disease, kind of thinking that was the most important thing that like nobody was talking about. And then after graduating, I started a postdoc at UPenn in all of 2023. That was the year that I was there. But during that time, I stumbled across Jack Cruz's work in April of 2023 on the podcast that he did with Andrew Huberman and Rick Rubin on Rick Rubin's podcast, Tetragrammaton. And this was the first time that I had been exposed to Jack Cruz somehow. It's pretty weird because like I had listened to other podcast channels that he had been on in the past, but somehow he just did not cross paths with me. And so I was kind of shocked at first because I was like, how did I not know any of this information? He was talking about light. He was talking about evolutionary biology and how we as a species are designed to receive an abundance of sunlight and why that is, and the interactions between sunlight and our biology and what happens when we don't get that. Coupling that with the artificial light environment that we're now bathing ourselves in is this recipe for disaster from a health standpoint. And I was just kind of flabbergasted because I was like, wow, like completely blindsided. I had been exposed to circadian biology prior to this, but for whatever reason, it just didn't land as like a super important thing that I needed to like dedicate my life to. But the way that Jack phrased things and the way he presented the information, it just immediately resonated with me. And ever since then, it's been over a year and a half. I've spent probably like 8 hours a day studying or more, just completely obsessed with understanding this information, implementing these practices and seeing dramatic changes in my personal health, implementing and helping other people implement these changes in their health through my private practice, working with clients, and just seeing incredible performance gains and health gains, and people who had struggled for years with nagging symptoms suddenly getting relief seemingly overnight. The more that I, started implementing with clients and myself, the more I realized like this is really like the elephant in the room that nobody's talking about. And I decided that I needed to dedicate my career and my personal life also just telling my friends, my family, and the people on my platforms about this information that I think will absolutely change the world when it reaches that grand scale. I can't hear your audio.
Sorry, I muted you because there was the chimes in the background. So it's the life of being outside. But yeah, first of all, we're both outside. If people notice, like most of my podcasts are upstairs, but with the window open. But today for Dr. Alexis, we're going to try one outside. Hopefully we can get some more going like this. It's like half outside just because I don't know if there's kids running around or who knows.
Haha. It's okay. Earlier I was recording a podcast and the leaf blower man came to clean up the leaves. I was like, no.
Oh, it's perfect. I'm just waiting for my Great Dane to just start barking out of nowhere. So we'll just pause it if we have to. There was something I also wanted to share. There's a lot that we learned, but just to throw a little funny stuff, like even when it was cold and we lived in Fernandina Beach, north of Jacksonville, me and my wife would just be out there standing there looking at the sunrise. And we were kind of new to the neighborhood. So people were just like, why are they always looking at our car every morning? And eventually when I went up to them and I was like, hey, we're just so you know, we're just looking at the sun. Okay, that's cool. So it's funny how like a lot of the stuff that we're doing don't really align with a lot of people that we're in touch with. So just people realizing it's okay. At the end of the day, we have one life and we got to do what we got to do.
Totally. And I always welcome questions. Like, I like being the weirdo. I like being the one who everybody's like, what is she even up to? Because I'm happy to share the information. I also made t-shirts, like Make Mitochondria Great Again shirts a few months ago. So I've been wearing those like whenever I go out in public. And so many people, like dozens of people have asked me about it. So many people are like intrigued, or they're like, I love your shirt. Tell me more about it. And so it's an awesome conversation starter. The same way, like if you go outside every day and you're watching sunrise, your neighbors are like, what are they up to? Eventually they might ask, and eventually you could educate them and potentially completely change their lives ultimately.
Absolutely. Maybe just put your website in the back of your shirt. When you're in the coffee line, they're just
QR code.
Going back to what you talked about mold, my wife is allergic to penicillin. So like we moved to a horse farm last year just because my daughter wanted to live on a horse farm. It was just something she wanted to do. With my business, we're able to do that. So we moved our 40-foot RV to a horse farm that was very nice near Gainesville. And unfortunately, there was a leak and next to my wife's bed, and she was getting fatigued and tired and didn't want to do much, had trouble going up the stairs. She was like a stellar D2, full ride soccer player. So it's like the mold hits you. So I can relate with you with that too. And I think over time it was hitting me, but we're happy to get out of that space. So if anyone's in that, and now that when I go into buildings, I can smell if there's mold in that area.
Oh yeah. Well, actually, fun fact, melanin is a really powerful method of detoxification in the body. So the more melanin you have in your surface and in your interior, the more you're protected from insults such as mold, such as heavy metals, such as oxidative stress. And that's something that a lot of people don't know. People think, melanin is just there for protection from UV rays. But what's actually happening is melanin is actually allowing you to harvest free energy directly from the sun. And that's why people who have more equatorial ancestry have darker skin. Well, that darker skin, it's not just protection from UV rays, it's actively harnessing the power of the very high quality sunlight in those regions and allowing you to essentially, what happens is when that sunlight strikes your melanin on your skin, it allows neighboring water molecules in the skin to get split. And when they're split, it releases free electrons as well as molecular hydrogen and molecular oxygen. Molecular oxygen is important for supporting respiration in the mitochondria. Molecular hydrogen also is, but it's also a really potent antioxidant. And the electrons are actually what directly powers energy production in the mitochondria. So when you're eating food, you're not eating for carbs, fats, and proteins, you're eating for electrons and protons. And so you can actually eat the sun essentially by just getting your bare skin out into the sunlight, because you're splitting water to make free energy when you do that. In addition, melanin directly can bind to heavy metals from the bloodstream. So anybody who is basically has a poor environment, maybe you live in a city, you're around a lot of brake dust, maybe you have mold in your apartment, the best thing you can do is get into an environment that allows you to cultivate the melanin on your surface, on your skin, because that also will additionally build melanin inside, because when you're stimulating melanin production outside, it also stimulates inside. But by cultivating that melanin, you're really creating a very robust physiology against toxic environments.
Well, that's interesting, because there's so many people in America that want to have that quick pill, that magic pill, that quick fix. But it's as simple as like, I'll be at my desk and just be like kind of tired for a second, and I'll just go outside around the block for a quarter mile and just walk barefoot. We did a walk today, me and my wife, but like that recharged me. Now I'm just like ready to work again. But people are willing to get coffee. People are willing to drink certain things or have melatonin before bed or whatever it is. Everyone has that little quick hack that they need. So going back to, I read your website and you talked about obesity as in high school, but then what you did to change it around. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I mean, I really did it the very canonical, like centralized way, like I said, counting calories and going to the gym every day. I would say at that time also, because of my age, I was getting out of the house more, which I think was also a really big role, because like I said, I think I had all this mold in my home that was really weighing me down and creating a metabolic dysfunction, mitochondrial dysfunction. So that was important. But then, counting the calories really took a toll on my mental health and relationship to food. And so that's why, now if I'm working with a client who's overweight, I'm not focusing strictly on that. I'm really working on, how can we retool your environment to naturally suppress your appetite and increase your energy expenditure, which is what UVB light does, by the way. So when you get out into UVB light and it interacts with your skin and your brain via the eyes, it stimulates the production of this prohormone called pro-opiomelanocortin, or POMC. POMC is cleaved into 10 different hormonal products. 3 of them are alpha, beta, and gamma MSH, melanocyte stimulating hormone. So I alluded to this earlier when I mentioned UVB light stimulates melanin production. It's via this pathway, via the production of these MSHs. But in addition to those roles, alpha MSH in particular, when it reacts with receptors or binds to receptors on the hypothalamus, which is like the thermostat of the body located in the brain, it stimulates the body to have a greater resting energy expenditure and a decreased appetite. And that's actually another sign that you are literally eating a light. You're eating essentially light when you're out in the sun, and your body's literally suppressing your appetite because it doesn't need more energy, because it's generating free energy through your skin's exposure to the sunlight and your bare eyes being exposed to the sunlight as well. And so that's like a holy grail in terms of weight loss. Like that in combination with optimizing the leptin and insulin system. So leptin resistance is even upstream of insulin resistance. So if somebody's coming to me insulin resistant or issues with blood sugar regulation, we're going to look at leptin as well. And we're going to figure out what in their environment is creating leptin resistance, which is extremely common because the factors that can create leptin resistance are essentially sunlight deficiency and an overabundance of artificial blue light in the environment, in addition to, maybe not getting cold, not eating a seasonal diet, things like this, circadian health, being exposed to too much artificial light at night. There's a lot of very actionable things that can then, if we really dial these small, mostly free inputs into somebody's lifestyle, now they can naturally start to drop weight without even having to worry about counting a single calorie. Their appetite will just be more regulated. And then, if we want to incorporate more dietary prescriptions, let's say, we can, try to eat a more seasonal diet, which allows your physiology to be linked with your natural environment. And that allows your body to understand what season it is and how it's supposed to be interfacing with nutrients from food, essentially. So much of the food that we're eating is dead. It's devoid of biophotons because it's literally been stripped and it's been sitting on a shelf for however long, or it's been farmed conventionally with, pesticides and stuff that make it less vital to begin with. And then maybe it's sitting on a truck for a week and then it's sitting on a shelf for another 2 weeks. And so most of our food, if we're not buying like local produce and meat, has been sitting around a while. It's less nutritious from a nutrient standpoint. It's also less nutritious from a biophoton standpoint. and our bodies have trouble interpreting that food information then and understanding what to do with it. Food is really a combination of energy and information. The problem is most of the food that we're consuming is just energy. The information has been stripped away, and so our bodies don't process those nutrients the same way that they would have otherwise. So I really like focusing on those foundationals because whatever I did, my approach led to an eating disorder that lasted over 8 years and terrible, terrible gut distress, like blood and mucus in my stool every day for like years. Couldn't eat anything without extreme bloating and discomfort and pain in my abdomen. I ended up doing an elimination diet, and I found out that dairy was a huge trigger for me, and I ended up removing it for like 6 years. No butter, like nothing, very strict. Then I ended up working on my microbiome, and now I can eat dairy again, and it's fine. That coupled with like the circadian light biology stuff is like life-changing from a microbiome perspective and a digestive health perspective. But yeah, I wouldn't recommend what I did, because what I did ended up causing a whole host of other issues. And now with my perspective, I can really see, how my journey could have been optimized if I had the information then that I do now. And so my goal is really to help people get like the shortcut. It's not a shortcut, but it's like get on the right path to begin with, so you don't have to flounder around trying to find your way. And that's why I also appreciate the struggles that I went through as well, because it really gave me some wisdom and insights around like what not to do and what are the pitfalls of like the centralized approaches, let's say, and what could we do better to generate less suffering and more success in the long run.
That's beautifully said. And I think something that I stress a lot on my podcast or my Instagram is that we're blessed with the adversity that comes upon us and we learn from it. It allows us to fall forward, and that's what you did. And you're making a difference in the world. So
yeah, wounds become our wisdom.
Exactly. So the people that listen to the show probably can relate to me, but I'm really big on productivity. I'm really big on trying to fit in as much as we can. My wife will be out there tanning and just reading a book. I have trouble with that. I feel like, what could I be doing during this 20 minutes that I'm reading a book? And I'll do something. So to relate to that, before I learned about you and Jack Cruz, like before bed, while I'm doing like recovery foam rolling or something like that, I'll end up like watching YouTube videos of the races to learn from, or anything that can help me be a better speaker or whatever, something that just to learn from or be motivated by. And the morning I would run on a treadmill with a TV literally right in front of my treadmill, killing my eyes, just because that was benefiting me to learn while I run on a treadmill because it's cold outside or it's raining. So things like that, I feel like us men, busy dads, women, mothers, we all are just trying to fit in it. And we're not thinking that these things that we're thinking are good that are hurting us. So I guess if you can like share some things that you've seen from your athletes and what type of athletes are you helping to see what they're going through and what they've changed.
Yeah, so I've got quite a few fighters, like MMA fighters. I've got some sprinters. I've got some basketball players, some soccer players, a couple swimmers. So those are kind of the main groups that I've worked with so far. But I mean, overall, the overarching theme is that, no matter what athlete you're working with, athletes are humans first. And so if we're not cultivating strategies that are actually supporting the human that you are or the human in front of you, that's not a winning strategy long term, because you could do some hacks that can enhance performance in the short to medium term, but if that costs you the longevity of your career or your longevity period, that's not a worthy trade-off that most people want to take. Some people will want that, and that's fine. If they have informed consent, they can do that. They can sacrifice their health long term or their performance long term if they want to do that. But I think most people don't want to make that trade-off. And the best part about it is, if you actually focus on curating the inputs that we actually need as humans to function optimally and optimally metabolically, physiologically, athletically, that they actually kind of all marry together. And it really is all rooted in this foundation of the health pyramid of light, dark, water, and magnetism, which Jack lays out so nicely. And essentially, these are the inputs that are required to have mitochondrial health. And mitochondria are these units within cells that are responsible for making virtually all of the water, the metabolic water and energy, chemical energy that our cells need to thrive and to function properly. And so if an athlete is, kind of burning the candle at both ends, like you said earlier, and they're not giving their system the inputs that allow them to recover, to regenerate their tissues, to have a healthy nervous system, which of course is so important from a movement aspect, like dopamine status controls movement quality. And nobody likes to talk about that, but if you're working out in a blue lit gym, which is completely burning out your dopamine system, versus working out outside with your bare skin and your bare feet on the ground. Now you're getting that direct stimulation of your dopaminergic system via that POMC cascade I mentioned earlier. 3 of the other cleavage products of POMC are alpha, beta, and gamma endorphins, which are the endogenous opioid molecules that enhance baseline dopamine levels, improve learning and memory and cognition and motor function and motor learning as well. That if we're working out in that outdoor environment, we're not only going to be able to work out more effectively, but we're going to be getting better recovery. Our performance is going to be better in the acute sense, but also in the long-term sense. And so we're no longer making a sacrifice to be a high-performing athlete. You can actually, by curating that lifestyle that's required, just the basic inputs that are required for being a human, you're actually supporting your performance directly as well. And so there's so much like shortcuts and a desire for shortcuts and like, you know, PEDs and other things within athletic performance, but it's like you actually get the biggest bang for your buck by nailing down the basics. And then once you have that foundation built, if you want to add an extra, 1 or 2% or 0.5% from adding in some exogenous whatever, you can do that, but you're not going to get the benefits you're looking for if that foundation isn't built. And so that's why I always focus on these foundational inputs of light, dark, water, and magnetism in an athlete and any human that's coming to me, because this is just the basics for being Homo sapiens.
Yeah. And I think all of us athletes, we want it now. Like, for
Yep.
example, we have a world championship coming in December. I put in some mean fitness training last month, and I was just telling my wife, I feel tired again. Like, this is the way I felt in the spring. I feel tired again. And I literally just took a step back, took some rest. I focused on 8.5 hours to 9 hours of sleep. Well, my wife made me. She helped me. You know her, but she keeps me on point. And I was really used to 5 hours of sleep, wake up early, grind before the kids wake up. Sun comes up, I would be there for sunrise, but then I'd be tired later, just needing coffee for the day for the second workout later in the day. And I'd be maybe doing that in the garage with a red light on or something. But even that died me out. So for now, just lately, I've just been focusing more on enjoyment, doing things that I love. So I'm a little more happy, a little more energetic, and I'm kind of healing. So I'm going to kind of space things out a little bit more and listen to my body a little bit more versus the stress of, oh my God, we have a world championship coming soon. Like, I got to do whatever I can, because the way my wife has explained it, and I believe it, is like, if we're trying to build on a poor foundation, I'm going to break down later and not be able to perform then, or maybe next year, or maybe it gets worse or I get hurt. There was somebody in our industry that recently just had a minor stroke who's a world champion for several years.
Mm-hmm.
So if it can happen to them, it can happen to anybody. And it was a clear sign, like, hey, you need to chill out and follow Dr. Alexis, follow Jack Cruz, listen to my wife, and I already feel better just a week later. So
Yeah, I mean, there's so much wisdom in working smart and not hard, and it sounds trite, but you can literally get incredible performance and gains or muscular gains or whatever you're looking to optimize physically in a shorter period of time if you're doing it in a smart way, if it's timed correctly, if it's combined with the other correct inputs correctly. Then you can look at, for example, the Sherpas in Tibet. Like, they will literally hike Mount Everest, go up Mount Everest with Europeans. They weigh like 140, 150 pounds. They're hiking up this mountain with the Europeans. The Europeans are gassed, like they're completely toast. Sometimes the Sherpas literally need to carry the Europeans back down. So it's like a 180 to 200 pound mass on their shoulder as a 140 pound individual with very small muscles. They don't look ripped or buff, but they are extremely strong. So there's immense wisdom to be learned from them, because I think we have such a focus on facades in our culture where it's like, you want to look buff, you want to look tough. But, when it comes down to actual performance, you could tear an Achilles, or you could get an ACL tear or some other soft tissue injury, even if you look like Adonis, but your tissues aren't actually high quality. And that's what we're seeing in basketball, for example. Soft tissue injuries are completely off the rails, like so many soft tissue injuries. And it's because that's the worst sport from a circadian perspective. They're playing night games. They're playing under these blaring LED lights, and they're also really working hard. Like, it's a very endurance and an agility intensive sport. And you see the soft tissue injuries there, the ACL tears, the Achilles, and muscle pulls and things like this. And it's no surprise, because that is literally the worst environment for those players to actually succeed and do really well. And yet again, it just comes back to money, because they're like, okay, well, we need these games to be at nighttime. That's when the viewership's going to be the highest, for example.
Yeah.
And we're not actually thinking about the athletes. And that's another like part of the rub where like I'm working with athletes. There's just like awareness that gets built over time where it's like the people who are like pushing for your success within your organization, it's kind of very short-minded. Like they could replace you in a minute for most cases. They don't really care about you. And so you have to care about you and you have to look out for yourself and make sure you're getting the right information and engaging in the right behaviors so that you can have the longevity in your sport that you want, that you can have the happy, healthy life that you want outside of the sport too. Because that's another thing, of course, that we see a lot in athletes where it's like you were dedicated to the sport for your entire life and then maybe you have a career-ending injury and now what is your identity? Like you have a crisis because you don't even know what you're good for outside of that sport. And so it's so important to be able to cultivate a life and interests outside of the sport, but also just be able to have your health and your vitality so that you can be creative and you can see opportunities and you're not going to be locked into this like, it's not, I don't want to say a dead end career, but it's like, we just need to be diversified essentially. And in order to be diversified, we have to have high functioning dopamine systems that allow us to have a higher mind. Like literally when we're burned out, we're on screens all day, it shuts down our peripheral vision and our higher mind because it's locking us in this low grade sympathetic state all the time. And when you're in that state, you're more prone to injury. You're also, utilizing fuel substrates as effectively. You're liberating more glucose and fat than you should. You're not being efficient, essentially. It's also burning out your mitochondrial engines. And when we're in that state, which most people are, you can't really see the bigger picture and how you fit into it. And so the more we can just dial in the light environment to start with and really get our sun exposure in, see sunrise, get our midday sun and block blue light at night, then you can really start to see more opportunities. You can start to be more creative. And now, if something catastrophic happens, you actually have the cognitive tools online to be able to deal with kind of whatever life is throwing your way instead of like your whole world shattering.
Yeah. And going back to your basketball point, I grew up playing ice hockey my entire life since I was 4, minor league ice hockey. And I know we had like 5 games in 7 nights, and literally our game would start at 7. We would finish around 10. We'd go visit, go to the restaurant after with the fans. So for another hour, we wouldn't really get to sleep till 1:30. And then the next day we'll have a practice at 8:30, 8 o'clock, 9 a.m.
Wow.
in the morning, or we'll have the day off and just continue it, whatever it is. And then we're young guns, so literally during the week we would just go to the beach and go happy hour and get drunk during the day or whatever. So it was really irresponsible. We were killing ourselves inside and out. But that's one
We can
reason.
get away with a lot when you're young. That's the thing. It's just over time, especially if you're acting, let's say, more irresponsibly when you're young, now you're really kind of burning through your potential, so to speak. And then, when you're in your 30s, maybe you start getting like nagging injuries constantly because you didn't know better back then. But I think actually the earlier we can get people into this information and exposed to it, the more we can really extend longevity and also like our peak performance. Like I really am very interested to see like what are the limits of performance, like outside of PEDs and all of that, just like if we dial in these basics, what is possible? Because I think if you look at the Sherpas, like that's incredible. Like that is peak performance. And yet
Seriously.
we're kind of disconnected from that, at least within the way that our society views it.
And I think people have to be willing to make that change. It is hard. All the changes my wife has already instilled in our family, making sure it's cold at night and making sure all the curtains and windows are all that's closed. But, there are people in the pro hockey or the hockey world that I've known that are dying, that are getting cancers, that are getting tumors. And that's one reason why we decided to move 6 hours south, closer to the equator, stronger sun, more efficient, and change my daughter's sport from ice hockey to roller hockey. So now instead of me coaching ice hockey in the blue lit arena, we're now out in the sun, which is pretty cool.
That's great.
But that's the changes. It's tough because we're a little different, so we're not really part of the regular corporate world, a structure. Everyone goes to school and drinks on the weekends or whatever. We don't do all that stuff, so we're not part of that in crowd. So we're okay with that. But people have to be willing to know that people are going to ask questions. And my parents think I'm weird and wearing glasses at their house when they have all their lights on past sunset. So, but yeah, what advice do you have for those people out there that are kind of starting to learn from you, but then they're having social issues from other people?
Yeah, so I would say the biggest issue would come if like you're doing something and you don't actually know why you're doing it. You just are doing it because somebody told you to do it, or you think that it's a good idea because you trust the person saying it. I don't think that's a good idea. I think you should fully be on board with what you're doing and know why. Because then if somebody asks you, like, first of all, you'll have an answer for them that is like cogent and makes sense. But you should also have the resolve within yourself to know, like, I'm doing this for this reason and these are the benefits I will experience from that. And also take note of those benefits directly. Like, for example, before I fell down the light rabbit hole, I was always considering myself a night owl. I would be like, watching TV until like 1 a.m. on like a weeknight. It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
And so right when I found this work, within the first couple days, I bought blue blockers. I started wearing them starting around sundown. And lo and behold, I started getting tired at like 9, 10 p.m. And I was like, this is crazy. I never go to bed this early, but yet I'm feeling tired. So I would just naturally go to bed earlier and wake up earlier. And the proof was very much in the pudding for me. Like, I immediately noticed that difference on day one. Within the first week, I noticed I had more energy. My workouts felt stronger. I just felt like I had better cognitive function while I was working with clients and things like this. And so I very much noticed direct benefits in a very short period of time that gave me the buy-in that I needed to really stick with this and like take things to the next level. Building that little bit of momentum really helps with like building this foundation and then allowing you to, help influence the rest of your family, take your practices to another level, to teach clients how to do that or whatever it may be. And so anybody who is just doing something and they don't necessarily know why they're doing it, or they're not looking for the benefits, they're not keeping tabs on like how they're feeling and just making sure that you are actually understanding why you're doing the things. It's so important when it comes to the social aspects, because then it becomes like a no-brainer. It's like, instead of somebody asking why are you doing that, you will be asking them, why aren't you doing this?
Yeah. And I was just going to say something, but like on top of that, time efficiency of every day went from a 4 a.m. start, sleeping at 12 at midnight, thinking I was productive. And now me and my wife are way more structured, way more organized, way more productive between 7 to 7. Like, I'm literally waking up 5 minutes before sunrise, and then we're putting the phones away an hour before we go to bed, make sure we have our glasses on, even though we have all the lights off in the house. So neighbors probably think we're gone at night. But that's important. So let's go back to the 101 of circadian rhythm, for just to lower it down a little bit, because I have a lot of knowledge on it already because my wife and listening to your podcast when I run and stuff. But please explain like what circadian rhythm is and how it can help you, or how it can not, like if you don't, adhere to it, like how can it hurt you?
Yeah, so the circadian rhythm is just one of the biological rhythms that exist within our bodies. The circadian in particular refers to the 24-hour cycles within the body. And the circadian rhythm is present within all cells. The master clock of the entire body is within the brain. It's directly connected to the retina and the eye via something called the retinohypothalamic tract. Connects to the retina, then connects to this master clock called the SCN, or the suprachiasmatic nucleus, which lives in the hypothalamus. Again, it's like that thermostat, that central controller in the body. So the input that shapes the timekeeping of that master clock is blue light. So in nature, midday sun is like 25% blue light, over 50% red and infrared light, some UV light, like depending on the season, less than 10%, even like in New Jersey, maybe in like the summertime. So UV light's pretty low, and it varies, fluctuates depending on what latitude you're at, what time of year. But the blue light's pretty consistent. About around a quarter of the sunlight is blue, the rest red and infrared, and then some of the other visible spectrum. So that blue light from midday sun tells your eye clock that it's the middle of the day. And so that's why the blue light signal is really important to be mindful of, because there's so much artificial blue light in our environments in the form of our device screens, our phones, tablets, computers, TVs, our light bulbs, all of our white LEDs and fluorescent bulbs. They're all highly enriched in blue light.
Like casinos too, right?
Oh yeah, so that's where this tech really developed. Like back in the 50s, 40s, casinos started being built up, and they noticed that if they blocked all the natural light coming in through windows, and they used all this blue light on the slot machines, that people would spend more money and they made a better profit. And so that's kind of where this started. It ended up also going into like MK Ultra. That's also how MK Ultra was informed about the impact of light. It was like really through seeing the impact of the casinos, and they realized over time, and this actually isn't conspiracy theory, it's conspiracy fact at this point, and a good podcast to really get the masterclass on this would be Danny Jones' episode. Is like a 4-hour episode with Dr. Jack Cruz that came out like a week and a half ago or 2 weeks ago. And so they essentially found out through this program that they could control people using light. And it's really via that mechanism I mentioned earlier, where if we're on blue light screens and under blue light all the time, it burns out our dopamine systems. It makes us more suggestible. It makes us more malleable, let's say, to whatever inputs, they kind of want to put into our awareness. And so we're kind of all subject to that in society now. It's now everybody's addicted to their technology, and that's also, again, by design, because that blue light hijacks that dopamine system, makes you keep wanting more. And so we're really always meant to receive blue light with an abundance of red and infrared light from the sun. Like I mentioned earlier, over 50% of midday sun is red and infrared. But in all of our tech, it's isolated blue light with next to no red and infrared light. And that's because infrared light is seen as like a waste product, energy inefficient, because it's AKA heat. Infrared light and heat, same thing. And so in the tech world, heat is seen as this inefficiency, this waste. And so it's been engineered out of our technology, not realizing that infrared light is actually an essential nutrient for our bodies. It directly penetrates into our bodies and stimulates mitochondrial function. Blue light actually has the opposite effect. When blue light stimulates the mitochondria on our skin, eyes, and proximal brain regions, it actually decreases metabolic or mitochondrial function. And that's another reason why in nature you always encounter blue with red and infrared. It's that balance. But in our modern indoor environments, we don't have that balance. That's coupled with the fact that all of the window glass that we have in all standard buildings blocks 100% of UVB light, about 30% of UVA light, and almost all infrared light, because again, if you want to air condition an indoor environment or keep it temperature stable, you don't want heat from the outside coming in, changing that. And so all of our window glass is essentially coated to make it energy efficient. But what I like to say is that energy efficiency and technology is creating an energy crisis in the human body, because when we look at the two groups of light wavelengths that are most important from a human bioenergetics perspective, it's UV and it's infrared. And those are the two that are being systematically depleted from our indoor environments through our glass technology and our tech, like lighting technology and our technical device technology as well. And so as it relates to the circadian rhythm, though, the blue light is that master clock timekeeper, essentially. And so we really need to maintain blue light exposure only during the day, ideally from the sunlight. And then at nighttime, we want to start blocking blue light with a pair of high quality blue blocking glasses that block 100% of blue light. There's daytime blue blockers that you can use if you're going to be like going into a grocery store or on screens a lot that you can't put an endogenous filter on the screen. You can wear 60% blue blockers, which have a yellow lens. The nighttime 100% blockers have a dark orange lens. That's how you know they're good quality. If it's a clear colorless lens, it's blocking maybe a couple percent. That's not going to cut it. It needs to have a deep orange colored lens in order to be 100% blue blocking. And so if you can indoors, put like red light bulbs to use at night if you need lights, for example, then do that. And you can put filters on your screens. I have a pinned reel on my profile that shows you how to turn your iPhone or Mac devices screens like amber or red so that you can endogenously filter. But if you can't do that, you pop on your blue blockers to watch, if you're going to watch TV or be on your screens, do that. Some TVs also will allow you to have a RGB filter so you can turn it red. That's what we do for ours if we're going to watch it. But these are all just little hacks you can do to reduce your blue light load at night inside, which is extremely important because both light from the sun and darkness at night are equally important when it comes to our circadian rhythm and the health of our biology. There's not one that's more important. So that's what makes biology decentralized. It's that there's not one central controller, there's two. And that means that they both are equally important. They both have a role to play, and one isn't like tyrannically controlling the other, let's say. So that darkness at night allows certain programs to be activated in our bodies, which allows melatonin release to happen from the pineal gland. That melatonin can go into the bloodstream and bathe all of our cells in this really potent antioxidant. Melatonin isn't just responsible for going to sleep and staying asleep, but also it's a really powerful antioxidant that's, fun fact, also expressed in every mitochondria within the body that serves as a local antioxidant within that reactive mitochondrial environment. It really helps to quench inflammation and reactive species in the mitochondrial environment. So that's happening when it gets dark, but we're also activating circadian programs and different gene expression profiles in response to darkness. And these types of programs will consist of things like wound healing and injury recovery and repair and regeneration, tissue healing, and things like this. These are the kinds of activities that are supposed to go on at nighttime, versus in the daytime, we're engaging in things like digestion and cognitive function and physical movement. So there's completely distinct activities that are happening biologically at night and during the daytime. But if we're constantly exposing ourselves to light at night, our bodies are never sensing nighttime, and so we're missing half of the picture. when we're not getting that darkness at night. And so that's really what it boils down to circadian wise, is optimizing that darkness at night and getting enough bright light from the sun during the day.
Yeah. So in summarization is basically when I was oversleeping, when I was staying up late and I was looking at blue light and I thought I was doing best for my body to race for races and train late night with a big TV in front of me or my phone in front of my face and then try to fall asleep. I really wasn't sleeping and I'd wake up early. I just didn't allow my body to reset is basically what you're getting at, right?
Yeah, absolutely. We need both programs to be running in order to recover. I mean, especially from an athlete's perspective, your recovery is everything. That's what's going to allow you to grow as an athlete, for your muscles to grow, for your soft tissues to be able to withstand the
Wear and tear.
amount of force transduction that needs to happen during very athletic sports and other types of movement. And so if you don't have that period of time where your body is able to regenerate and recover, it's just a ticking time bomb. It's just an injury waiting to happen.
And going back to the bright lights of the casinos, that's why we spend so much money in IKEA.
Yeah. Oh my God. I bet.
Seriously, now that I think of it, and also, my screen right now is red, so like your hair is white, my facial hair is white. So I downloaded this thing called Iris. I think you've heard of it.
It's great.
It's like $4 a month or something like. Totally worth it. You take it out of your PayPal. I'm staring at my screen for 6 to 8 hours a day, so I need it. Also, darker skin. So I grew up in Connecticut, all clouds, just like New Jersey. And then went to New Hampshire and it's cold. And my wife was telling me about the darker skin, how I need more sun than someone else like her. So can you explain that a little bit? Because I have some friends up north that may not be doing well, but they're darker skin as well. So what advice do you have for those guys?
Yeah, this is huge. And it's something that somehow it makes sense, but some people think it's counterintuitive somehow, where it's like, I have darker skin, so why would I need more sun? Because I guess people associate going out in the sun with like getting a tan. And if you already have melanin, it's like, why am I tanning? But that's not the point at all. So if you just think about ancestrally, if you have darker skin, you have at least one side of your ancestors came from a more equatorial region, which means that, around the equator, you're getting high quality, high UV index sun year round. And that's what that skin evolved to receive. And if we use vitamin D, let's say, as a proxy for your sun exposure habits, people that have more melanin in their skin require more UVB light to make the same amount of vitamin D as somebody with light skin. And that's because melanin is this sponge for all frequencies of light. So if you have UVB light striking your skin and there's a ton of melanin there, the melanin is like basically sequestering that light away. And now there's not as much UVB light available to convert the 7-dehydrocholesterol into the pre-vitamin D3. And the result of that is going to be low vitamin D levels. And so we see most people with dark skin that live at a more northern latitude are going to be vitamin D deficient because the sunlight quality in that region is not matched to their skin type. And that's another reason why I personally believe that we see health disparities among Black and brown populations in the US, because most of our country is at a more northern latitude. And so most people who have melanated skin in this country, they're in a mismatched environment. They're not receiving the sunlight they actually need to thrive. Having said that, I think you can actually get around it somewhat. It's just that most people with dark skin are also living indoor lifestyles, because everybody's living more indoor lifestyles. And so they're not even leveraging the sun that is available to them. So the thing that I say for anybody living in a more northern latitude, like let's say anything over like 25th latitude and you have darker skin, you need to be really sun maxing and like getting out as much as you can, especially midday. So sunrise is like non-negotiable for everybody, just from a hormonal perspective, a circadian perspective. But midday sun is like absolutely imperative for anybody with darker skin, because you need more of that high energy, high UV index sunlight in order to run your biology. And like I mentioned earlier, you also get free energy from that process because you have more melanin in your skin that's able to harness that sunlight and do work with it. It's able to productively produce energy that your tissues could then use to thrive and to make their energy that they need to then, perform essential functions. So darker skin, you need more sun. You can use vitamin D as a proxy for whether or not you're getting enough for you. So I recommend shooting for between 60 and 80 nanograms per milliliter of serum 25 hydroxyvitamin D. And if you're within that range, that's a really good sign that you're getting enough sun for your skin type, for your body. If it's lower than that, for most people, that means you need more. You need to get more. There's a very small subset of people who have mutations that make that 25 hydroxy form a poor biomarker. They just will kind of have low levels, but if you look at like their active 125 dihydroxy form, it's normal. That's a small, maybe 1 to 5% of the population. For most people, you can use vitamin D as a biomarker. You can download an app like D-Minder or the My Circadian app that Sarah Kleiner made that allows you to track your sunning sessions, and it will basically, you can plug in like how overcast it is, where you're located, how much clothes you have on, your skin type, and it will tell you how much vitamin D you're making per unit time, and that can allow you to track, and then you can basically get a blood test. You can plug in your starting value, you can keep track of it over time, and that's a really good way to kind of gamify it and make sure that you're getting enough sunlight for you. There is another anomaly, I'll say, that has been cropping up more recently, and that is that depending on where you live, the abundance of non-native EMFs in your environment, let's say you live by a cell tower or, being bathed in Wi-Fi, 5G, 4G, 3G, etc., I do see that like the more non-native EMFs people are around, the harder of a time they have getting their vitamin D status up. And it seems like it's something that's happening on their surfaces, because we know vitamin D, it starts in the skin. We also know that non-native EMFs, they are a form of light. It's just non-visible light. And our mitochondria, in addition to making energy and water, they're also electromagnetic antennas and also emitters. So mitochondria release light primarily in the form of UV and infrared biophotons, but they're also detecting the light in the environment. And we really need more research on this, but there is already research showing that like even at the 3G frequencies for the cell towers was enough of energy in those radio waves to create tumors in rodents. And so we know there are biological ramifications. It's likely at the level of the mitochondria first, which typically precedes virtually any cancer or most chronic diseases as well. And so the more we can do to mitigate our non-native EMF exposures by not keeping your cell phone on your body, not using your laptop on your lap, not putting the Wi-Fi router in a room you spend a lot of time in, maybe putting it on a timer so that it turns off when you're sleeping, for example. These would be easy ways to mitigate your non-native EMF exposures, which can then help with your vitamin D optimization. This is my hypothesis. I hope to study this in my light lab sometime in the next couple of years. But for now, this is what I'm observing within my practice. People who live in California, like basically they're all vitamin D deficient, even if they spend all day outside. And so it's pretty striking, the effect that seems to be going on here. So the more we can mitigate, the better from a cellular health perspective. And then just, getting enough sun for you. I think tracking your vitamin D status outside of that issue is a really good way to gamify it and just keep tabs on whether you're getting enough sunshine for your skin type. And that, again, is going to adjust already for your melanin content, because vitamin D production is happening in a melanin-dependent manner, by the mechanism I mentioned earlier.
So, question. So, if there's somebody that's under 60 for vitamin D and they're just not there yet, but they're not taking supplementation for vitamin D or anything like that, they're following your protocols and everything like that from Jack Cruz and circadian rhythm tactics, but it's just not going up that high, that fast. So is it okay for people to use vitamin D supplements while they do the tactics at the same time, but then once you get past 60, you let go of it, kind of thing?
So there's actually no point, because if you look at the data on vitamin D supplementation, the only benefit you receive from that is at the very low end, where it's like if you have overt rickets, like you're sub 20 nanograms per mil, let's say, and you have issues with your teeth and your bones, like the physical calcium homeostatic processes that are modulated and facilitated by vitamin D, then you can supplement, because in the acute sense, you actually really need it. But in the long term, all of the data on vitamin D suggests that although vitamin D status is an important predictor for a whole host of diseases, including multiple cancer types, autoimmune disease, diabetes, cognitive decline, that vitamin D supplementation doesn't actually provide benefits in any of those areas. And so what that's telling us is that vitamin D primarily is serving as a biomarker of your sun exposure habits. It's not something that you're going to get a benefit from supplementing at that higher, like that optimal range. And so if you're not able to get to that 60 or above range naturally through the sun, that's when I would be doing a thorough survey of your environment to see what exactly is going on there. Is it where you live? Is it something about, is there a cell tower by your house? Where are you spending a lot of time? Is there a lot of non-native EMFs in that environment, for example? Or are you exposed to a ton of artificial light? Because like I mentioned earlier, that artificial blue light on the skin inhibits mitochondrial function in the skin. And we actually need functioning mitochondria in the skin in order to not only make new melanin, but also to make vitamin D, because vitamin D synthesis requires metabolic water production by those mitochondria within the skin. And so there's other things and other aspects of the environment I would look at in that case, but I would not recommend supplementation primarily because, one, there's no evidence that it will help with any of those chronic disease states. But two, it will also mask your ability to see how much you're actually making in the sun because you're artificially inflating it. And now it's kind of hard to understand, like, am I getting enough sun? I don't know, because now I'm supplementing and it's kind of
Yeah.
muddying the waters, let's say.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then going back to the cell towers things, we rent homes every year or so. Our last house, 6 months in, we was like, we don't even recognize that that tower was there. So it's almost as if they put it in overnight. We just didn't know it was there. And it was just pretty much like right over the street. It was pretty high and pretty big. So that could have an effect on things as well. So let's dive a little bit deeper into the athlete training. So say like in one given week, I'm doing 3 hard workouts in 1 week in 7 days. Is that too much for the body to handle if the foundation is not built, or if the foundation is built to rebuild and everything? Is that okay? Is that a reasonable amount of, that seems to be the norm, like for every hybrid athlete, is like 2 to 3 days a week you're working hard, and then the other days you're doing everything's aerobic, just to build that endurance. So what do you have to say about that?
I mean, I think that's completely reasonable. It's really just about optimizing that environment that you're training in. Like, if you can train outside with your bare feet on the ground and get those free electrons from the earth through the grounding at the same time as you're, getting sun on your skin, even if it's a cloudy day, it doesn't matter. You're still getting benefit because that red and infrared light from the sun, as I mentioned, can penetrate into the body and directly stimulate mitochondrial energy and water production, which is like the holy grail then, if you think about it from a performance perspective, because you're demanding quite a bit of energy from your body in order to engage in these activities. So the more that you can help to buffer that by allowing yourself to get that direct sun exposure and your feet bare on the ground, now you're kind of giving your body 2 extra inputs for that energy production requirement versus just relying on like food, let's say, because there are these 3 pillars to human bioenergetics. There's food inputs, and that's giving you electrons and protons, but there's also grounding, and there's also direct sunlight exposure onto the skin. So if we're maximizing and optimizing all 3 of those inputs, that's going to make your body much more resilient, and you're able to tolerate higher workloads, frankly. And so I think 2 to 3 days is totally reasonable. You could really go hard, and if you're doing that in an environment that is suitable for our bodies and optimizing those inputs, your recovery will probably be great. I mean, I personally noticed training hard outdoors, like doing heavy lifting outside, like my recovery is great. I don't even feel sore afterwards or in the days afterwards, and I feel like I can lift more and do more work in a given session. And so I think the proof is really in the pudding, and people can experience that for themselves as well by just trying it and see.
Yeah. I feel amazing working out outside, to be honest with you. I'm the crazy guy with the sled with so much weight on it,
Yes.
just on a bit, pushing it. So everyone in the neighborhood knows, just like, oh, that's just Dan. He's just doing his thing out there. So what about time frames? I know you messaged me. I know the answer to them, but say somebody's going to work out or train at like a 2 a day or a 3 a day or something. Or 3 days is not really going to happen. Sometimes just to catch up on something you missed, but like 2 a days, what time of day do you recommend for people to train?
Yeah, so from a performance perspective, typically people are going to be performing at a higher level in a fed state or like a post-absorptive state versus a fasted postprandial state. So through that logic, we're waking up, we're seeing sunrise, we're eating breakfast pretty shortly thereafter. And then within an hour or 2 hours of that first meal, if you want to do your first workout session of the day, that's a good idea, because then that allows you to get some carbohydrates in, some proteins in that first meal. That's going to help to support your muscle and your glycogen content. So that's going to, help with your performance in that first workout. Then you're going to your midday, you're going to get your midday sun, you can have lunch, and then maybe an hour or 2 after lunch would be a great time for that second workout session, because again, you're getting that carbohydrate input that's going to allow you to access that quick energy in the form of glycogen in your muscles. And that late afternoon, like between, let's say, 3 and 5 p.m., is also a peak for bioenergetics. Like your mitochondria are really firing. You're able to make more energy during that period of time. And your workloads or your work output tends to be higher during that time of day, just from a circadian perspective. So that would be the second workout. And then, you could do whatever recovery, you could have dinner, you could see sunset, and then you're winding down for the night.
Yeah. That's awesome. I mean, it's just great advice in my mind. I'm like, it's good to hear that that's okay. My wife's kind of like, you don't train like a regular human, and I'm like, well, I'm going to say Dr. Alexis says it's okay.
It's all
Um,
relative, right? Like it
yeah,
really just depends how adapted you are to the stimulus and,
yeah,
how much work you've put in the past, that because like muscle is very plastic, and also the soft tissues are as well. So depending on what your body is accustomed to, something could be very challenging for somebody else, but it could be easy for you depending on your training status. So the timing is really important. The nutrition is important. The light is extremely important because that's dictating your bioenergetics to make sure that you have enough fuel online to actually support the movements and the activities you're engaging in. And if we're dialing that in, like there's no reason you can't push the pedal to the metal because your
yeah.
recovery is going to be equally as good.
Yeah, and I appreciate the reminder about the nutrition because I did a race in September, and I did a full race, but then I did a teams race afterwards, literally within 45 minutes after. And I just didn't eat that morning really because my stomach kind of didn't feel right. And I didn't want to,
Mm.
my mindset has always told me, like, okay, never eat 3 hours before hockey game. That's what I always did in minor league pro hockey. It worked then, but it's not a good idea. I don't recommend it. But
What kind of race was it?
it was the first race was with a 31-pound backpack on my back for about 42 minutes, all out,
Mm-hmm.
high heart rate, pretty much the entire time. But then I had like 45-minute break between that to race again, all out even more, with my partner who did half the work, and he did all the running. I did all the workouts, and we did really well. But I ended up getting like a calf strain on my calf and cramping up, and my toes are kind of like this at the end. And we didn't hit the time that we wanted to break the elite qualification, just I think because I couldn't run. So I think nutrition is huge because I didn't really have a legit meal before that, before jumping in the car and driving 3 hours to get there.
Oh yeah,
So
that's where leveraging like, so for anything like that maybe you don't want to take in a lot of food because it could impair it could cause cramping or impair your performance. Leveraging things like exogenous ketones, making sure you're definitely leveraging like electrolytes and some sort of quick carbs, whether it's like
yeah.
honey or you can make like honey water with salt in it, something like this
Oh, that's
is
cool.
great like during the actual activity. And then before, you can also take during, like exogenous ketones. I really like Keto 5 is a brand that makes a free BHB acid. And so it's a little bit different than your standard like esters or salts. I personally, they're very potent. I really like them. And actually, if you want to get hooked up, I am a supplier for them, so I can like hook you up with those if you want. We can talk
Yeah,
about it after. But
sure. I'll
those
tag
are
you.
incredible for performance, especially if you're doing like a 45-minute race, let's say, you're really relying on mitochondrial metabolism because let's say we're talking about like a 100-meter sprint, that's very much driven by creatine and glycolysis. But if we're talking like 45 minutes, that's very mitochondrially based energy demand. And so ketones are actually the most efficient fuel source on a per carbon basis. You make more energy per carbon on a ketone compared to fat, glucose, amino acids. And so if you can have those on board and take it as like a quick shot, it doesn't have much volume, so it's not causing digestive upset and things like that, but it's very rapidly absorbed. That could absolutely give you a competitive edge. And I like to leverage ketones in most of my athletes actually because they're typically, regardless of the sport, there's this balance between being glycolytic and creatine driven versus being more endurance driven. And so if we can support both at the same time, I think that's where like the real money is, in combination with of course everything else we talked about.
Hmm. And I know a lot of my competitors that I race against, a lot of them take creatine.
Yep.
I went to college and I was like an assistant manager for GNC, and I would just see people just coming back for more and coming back for more creatine. And I'm like, they don't really like look in shape. So I would, just from that experience of years, I never bought creatine. What is your advice for that? Do people that are giving this out that much effort, like per week, like myself, do you need to buy creatine from like GNC or something, or does the sun just provide everything you need?
So creatine is an important nutrient. Our bodies can make it itself, but the thing is, it's kind of a can of worms. But there's something called one carbon groups or methyl groups that, if anybody's heard a conversation about like homocysteine or MTHFR, this is related because that's related to one carbon metabolism. These one carbon groups are involved in regulating gene expression and also detoxification within the kidneys and the liver. But as it turns out, creatine synthesis, if your body needs to make it, uses up a bunch of these one carbon groups, like up to 45% of the daily allotment that you get, essentially. So that means that's only if you're not getting enough through the diet. So like if you're not supplementing and you're not eating meat or fish, then your body's going to make up for that by making its own creatine, but it's at a cost because now it's taking those one carbon groups away from other processes. So when you're eating meat, I think like 2 pounds of ground beef will have like between 2 and 4 grams of creatine in it. When people are supplementing, they typically supplement between like 5 and 10 grams of creatine. There can be like a loading phase and then like a maintenance phase as well. But when you're supplementing creatine, you do actually increase the total amount of muscle creatine that's there. And creatine is a really important molecule in energy metabolism. So whenever you're engaging in very quick bursts of movement, that's entirely creatine driven. That's the quickest energy yield of any energy system we have. The three primary ones are going to be creatine metabolism, or the phosphagen system is another word for it, glycolysis, which is glucose oxidation, and then mitochondrial metabolism is the third. Mitochondrial metabolism can make the most energy, but it's slow. Creatine metabolism can make the quickest energy, but it's a very finite resource. It only lasts like 5 to 10 seconds. And so if you're involved in a sport that requires at some point very quick bursts to get an edge, you will probably benefit from supplementing with creatine. There is also evidence to suggest that creatine itself is a nootropic, and it's helpful in the context of neurodegeneration and cognitive decline, because creatine is also highly concentrated within the brain in addition to being concentrated in the muscles. So from a
not too
neurological,
much,
yeah,
basically.
yeah. So from a nervous
Gotcha.
system perspective, the brain is also benefiting tremendously from having enough creatine on board. I wouldn't say that there's necessarily an upper limit, but what I will say is for creatine monohydrate, about 20% of people who take it will experience some sort of gastric upset, diarrhea, gas, bloating, etc., because that monohydrate can basically pull water into the gut, and so can create some issues there. For anybody who does respond in that way, you can use creatine hydrochloride, HCl, and you'll receive the same benefit without that side effect. But about 80% of people who take monohydrate will not have that effect. And so you can feel free to use monohydrate. It's cheaper form, it's readily available, and it's very, I would say, scientifically supported. It's also something you naturally get through the diet, like I mentioned, from meat. I think mackerel is actually the highest creatine food that's known, which is pretty interesting. But
Nice.
so I don't think supplementing with it is necessarily like, it's not really like, let's say, a shortcut or hijacking the system necessarily versus other supplements like vitamin D, for example, which is like not the natural route of consumption. For example, taking a vitamin D supplement, it's not the right form when we're taking in foods that contain vitamin D, like cod liver oil. It's in a special sulfated form that makes it more bioavailable. The supplements are not in that form. And so in that case, I'm not recommending that. But in the case of creatine, it's pretty bioidentical. It's like what you would get through food. And so it's something that I would use in athletes and certain individuals to get a benefit without much harm at all.
But with a lot of red meat and a lot of seafood, like you mentioned, you should be okay.
Yeah, absolutely. You can totally do that through diet alone, especially, if you're eating a lot of red meat and mackerel. And we didn't even talk about DHA, but omega-3s from seafood are really, really important from a light perspective, because DHA is like 60% of your retina or more is composed of DHA, this long chain omega-3 fatty acid. About 40% of the brain by weight is DHA. And it's because DHA is actually what allows photonic or light energy from the sun and from your environment to be converted into electrical energy that it literally renders reality moment to moment. So the reason that I can see this computer screen right now and have this conversation with you is because of DHA in the retina and the brain. So it's really important from that perspective. It's also highly anti-inflammatory. It plays important roles in cell membranes and in cellular health as well. And most people are highly deficient in it because barely anybody eats, wild-caught seafood or shellfish or things like this. And the algal oil forms of DHA and omega-3s are much less bioavailable than animal forms. The best form of omega-3s that you can get is from eating fish roe, fish eggs, wild-caught fish eggs. It's a special phospholipid form of omega-3s that's really readily accessible to the brain. Outside of that, eating things like scallops or wild-caught mussels, clams, obviously fatty fish like salmon, mackerel, sardines, anchovies are all really great sources of these omega-3s that are so important from a metabolic health standpoint, but also from a light biology standpoint.
Yeah, well, my wife has every single day we have for lunch. She mixes the tuna or salmon with the sardines in there just a little bit.
Nice.
So we're every time, like if I forget where my phone is or something, or I forget a memory, she's like, "You need to get your DHA up, Dan. What's going on?" Like, I'm
She
like,
knows.
she's funny. So going back to, you talked about people that are comfortable with not going outside, like all day, like this slider is pretty much open. But like my parents' house, for example, like it is, everything's just closed. So I think a lot of people are faced with these allergic reactions, like when pollen comes in, they're just afraid of the pollen, they're afraid of the sickness of things, and the blinds are closed, everything's closed. And when we go visit, it's tough. I mean, it's, and I think my dad's lighter than me now. But, any advice for people that are just used to their ways the last 60, 70 years, just being able to get out in the sun? I think it's, I don't know, maybe because I grew up in New York and Connecticut, just used to just being indoors. You're in New Jersey, so you totally prove that it can be done up there as well. So what advice do you have for those people that are kind of always kind of indoors or driving with the windows closed, everything?
Yeah, I mean, our weather is pretty good up here, and I think most people are suffering in some aspect of their mental health or physical health, that they're kind of looking for solutions, but they're not seeing the like truth or reality right in front of their face because it seems too easy, because it's free. People think like, oh, if it works, it must be this expensive thing that I need to buy, and then suddenly I will create the health that I want. But the actual health gains and like the level ups in your health will come from dialing in these basics that are essentially free 99, like going outside, getting your bare feet on the earth, getting your skin out in the sun. These, don't cost a dime, and yet they can provide massive health benefits, especially over time, but also acutely as well, and blocking that blue light at night. And the tricky part about it, I would say, is that because, like we mentioned earlier, when you're exposed to that blue light all day and you're watching TV and you're on your screens, that also locks you into your way, because it's putting you in that low grade sympathetic state. It's shutting off your ability to critically think. It's shutting off neurogenesis, the ability to make new neurons, and also the ability to connect neurons together to form new connections. So it's literally creating dogmatism. It's creating rigidity.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a piece of awareness to bring along. It's like, if somebody's really rigid and resistant to making changes, well, this is actually just more evidence that we need to make benefits and like improvements in that department. And maybe just even explaining a little bit of the science and like the whys behind that. And maybe you can even observe them in their relationships, and maybe they're getting into arguments with their spouses, or they're, losing friends, or, they have stress in their work environment. It's like, well, maybe all of these things are actually related, and it's all related to the poor light environment that's being curated, that's being chosen.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of levers you can push on to kind of get somebody get buy-in with them. And then if you can just get a little bit of buy-in, it typically will allow momentum to be built that will allow them to make more positive change and see the benefits for themselves over time. Even if you tell them, try this for a week, if you don't notice anything, stop. But I'm certain that like anybody that I've worked with, at least, has seen benefits essentially right away, and
Yeah.
that's all they need to kind of help keep the wagon moving in the right direction, let's say.
So there's a lot of people that I've run into in the new neighborhood here. Is the fad is just big TVs everywhere,
Yeah.
Wi-Fi extenders everywhere, kids on iPads playing with virtual reality,
Oh yeah.
Oculus things, electric cars with big screens on it. It's a wild thing. It's a lot of us are getting caught up in this trendy things that are happening. When you think of ice baths, is it trendy or is it needed?
Oh, it's great. You can't see here, but on the other side of this computer, I have my Morosco. Especially in the context of like the hyper tech environment that we live in, cold is a really incredible offsetter of that, because a cold essentially works by, this is going to sound technical, but it helps to improve efficiency within the semiconductor network of the body. And so if we go back to like the 90s, there was a Nobel Prize winner named Albert St. Georgi who gave a talk to Robert O. Becker's medical school graduating class. Robert O. Becker is the author of the book The Body Electric and also the book Cross Currents. He was the first scientist that really shed a lot of light on the effects of non-native EMFs on our biology. And he was also one of the first canceled scientists. He lost his entire career after blowing the whistle on non-native EMFs when he went on to 60 Minutes on TV. And so during that talk that St. Georgi gave at Becker's graduation, St. Georgi said something like, it's really funny and like curious, but it seems like biology is encoding semiconductive proteins. Semiconductors meaning that they basically allow electrons to flow in certain conditions, and they allow light to flow as well. So basically these energy transducing structures. And so Becker ended up basically his entire research career was studying that point. But what St. George said was correct. And essentially our body is just full of semiconductor structures. If we look at the fascial network and collagen is a semiconductor, and it works with apatite in the bone, and together they make a semiconductive network to basically allow light and energy to be transmitted throughout the system. And so when you get cold, if you look at any like physics lab that studies semiconductors, they always do it at very cool temperatures because it allows the semiconductors to work better. So when you get your body cold, when you drop your body temperature down through cold exposure and cold water immersion, you're doing the same thing. There's also other benefits that come from that, which is like you get a really big dopamine and norepinephrine response from getting cold, which is incredible for mental health. Dopamine and norepinephrine are the two chemicals that people chase using stimulants like Adderall, except you get way more of an effect from cold than you do from Adderall. So you get that benefit to cognition, to mood. You also get benefits to your metabolism by stimulating brown and beige fat, which are these mitochondrially dense fat tissues within the body that make heat. They make metabolic heat. And they also serve as incredible sinks for glucose and fat from the circulation. So from a metabolic health standpoint, it's incredible to cultivate the beige and brown fat in the system that helps to clear excess substrates from the bloodstream and maintain metabolic health. Of course, you also get acute anti-inflammatory effects from colds. There's a timing issue here as well, because if you, let's say, do a strength training workout, you don't necessarily want to get in the cold bath after, because that could quench some of the inflammation that you actually need to build new muscle. It's an important stimulus. Inflammation is important from a training standpoint to get the adaptations you're looking for. But for men in particular, doing cold and then exercising has been shown to be massively beneficial to at least the hormonal system. So if you get cold and then you exercise, you increase testosterone quite a bit. It's very significant, especially over time. And that's from the work of Dr. Tom Seeger. He talks about this extensively. He's the co-founder of Morosco Forge. And there's other benefits too. So you also get, actually, if you cold plunge with like a partner, for example, cold stimulates the 2 of the 3 bonding chemicals in the brain that facilitate like familial and also romantic bonds. So oxytocin and vasopressin. So it's a good way to cultivate meaningful relationships. It's great for your mental health. It's great for your metabolic health. It's great for your semiconductor networks. So cold is amazing. Cold water is way more efficient than cold air. You could do like 3 to 20 minutes of cold water immersion, and you would have to do maybe a couple, let's say 45 minutes to 2 hours of air, like just going for a walk in the cold to get a similar benefit. Water has a very high specific heat capacity, meaning it wicks water away from your body really easily, or wicks heat rather from your body very easily, and that's what allows your core temperature to drop more quickly when you're in cold water. And so I think cold water is great. For women, I would recommend doing it a little more infrequently and also not as cold. So Jack recommends in general 50 to 55 degree water for probably, I mean, he recommends 2 longer sessions per week, like 2 to 5 long sessions per week between 20 and 45 minutes. What I typically do, I do 55 degrees. I'll do it once a week from 30 to 45 minutes. I'll do 1 20-minute session. I'll do a couple other maybe 5 to 10-minute sessions. And that's what I notice works for me. If women overdo it with cold, you can get issues with the cycle. Like you can get extensions in luteal phase, you can get shortening of ovulation. Things can just shift around. It's unclear to me whether it's acute shifting or it's going to be continuous. I personally track my hormones so I can keep track of these things, but I've heard from other people as well that their cycle kind of shifts around a little bit. Again, it doesn't necessarily mean it's bad, but I also don't know. We haven't studied it enough in women to know if it's predictable, if it's consistent over time, or if it's an acute kind of shift that's happening. But overall, I would say cold is massively beneficial as long as you're doing it at the right type and timing and at the right frequency as well.
That's really good information. It's still tricky though, because I think I heard that doing the ice bath is best before you go to sleep, but to do the ice bath before your workout, I'd run out of time because you got to mix in dinner, dishes. Before you know it, the day is over. So it's like, if you do your workout earlier in the day, is it still beneficial to do the ice bath after the workout after that?
So Jack doesn't recommend
before the workout. Sorry.
Jack doesn't recommend doing cold before bed.
Okay.
because when you are getting cold, it's massively stimulating your mitochondria. And when you stimulate your mitochondria make more biophotons. They make more light. So light,
Gotcha.
our bodies consider light from any source, let's say, it's associated more with like daytime. If we're getting a massive input of light at night, that's actually not what we're looking for, because we want darkness at night, both from like an internal and an external perspective. So I think in the early evening may be okay, maybe sometime before dinner or something like this. If you can reconfigure your schedule to, let's say if you're doing a lifting routine, to do even just 5 to 10 minutes of like a cold plunge before that. I think most
Yeah.
people can squeeze in 5 minutes, and you can get a benefit from that. If you want to do a couple longer sessions per week, I would just space them away from your weight training, essentially.
Gotcha. Okay. Awesome. If anybody wants to learn more about circadian rhythm and everything like that, what book do you recommend for them to pick up?
Well, there's so many. Well, I recently just wrote an ebook because I have a lot of beginners coming to me that just want the basics, like what do I do and like what science do I need to know to get started. So I wrote that ebook a couple months ago, and so people can find that on my Instagram in my link in bio. So that's a quick read. It's less than 100 pages, very visual, very written for the layman, but it also has quite a bit of like digestible science in it as well. So I've gotten really good feedback on that. There's a ton of books that I recommend. So I mentioned Becker's work on like non-native EMFs and the effect on the body. Those are really great. Those are Cross Currents and The Body Electric. There's also a couple other books worth mentioning. So Life on the Edge is a good one related to quantum biology. That's by Jim L. Khalili. And there's another book called, what is it called? It's called, I want to say it's called Power, Sex, and Suicide by Nick Lane. It's a book about mitochondrial biology. The name is very like interesting, right? So that's a good one as well. I have on my bookshelf. Those would be some of the, I guess, good beginner ones. My ebook is definitely the one that's catered to all the beginners, just know what information they need to know to start. But then depending on what people are specifically interested in, there's quite a bit of books in the quantum biology space that they can dive into. I have a post on my Instagram actually of like some of the big ones that I recommend for people, so they can go check that out if they're interested in reading something. And actually, there's one more I will say that is called Going Somewhere by Andrew Marino. And that book is, so Andrew Marino worked in Becker's lab before Becker got canceled. And so Andrew Marino ended up actually going to law school to become a lawyer to litigate the cases that Becker got involved in to defend his work. And so Andrew Marino's book, it's called Going Somewhere, A Life in Science, or Going Somewhere, and then it's something about a life in science. Anyways, it's basically his expose talking about all the corruption and like basically the hiding of high quality information because it doesn't fit a narrative. And so he outlines his timeline and working with Becker and the court cases and also the data that they presented to show like non-native EMFs are actively harming us and animals according to our studies, and how that was suppressed. So that's a really, really good one. It's a great read too. He wrote it very well, and it's full of like images and like data that people can look at if they want to learn more on that topic.
Now, I'll put it in the show notes, but what is your Instagram handle?
It's at Dr. Alexis Jasmine. So it's DrAlexisJazmyn. I'm also on X at the same handle. And they can also follow my podcast, which is Undoctrinate Yourself, which is on Spotify and YouTube right now. It will be on all podcast platforms pretty soon. And that's just like Undoctrinate Yourself, which is like a play on the word indoctrinate. And I just posted episode 37 of that today. So I started in October, and it's going really well. I've interviewed Jack 3 times on that, so they can check out his episodes. It's episode 13, 24, and 31 if they want to check those out. I've interviewed a bunch of other really incredible guests as well, so hopefully people can enjoy that. And I post a lot on Instagram in my stories and on my wall as well, free information and ways that you can just improve your life and feel better. So I hope people can enjoy that too.
Yeah, and I just listened to episode 33 this morning with the,
nice.
I think the dentist, right?
Yeah.
I was just dumbfounded. I was like, how it's part of their studies about the appendix. So basically, you can like cover a kid's mouth if you needed to when there's no parents in the room, which is crazy.
So crazy.
They've actually asked to do that with 2 of our kids, and we've decided not to do it.
Wow.
Because we just don't know what's going to go on behind the scenes there.
That's for the best. I've literally had terrible medical trauma from a dental like a oral surgeon when I was 2 years old that I literally took like 2 decades to recover from.
Yeah. Absolutely wild. I know you mentioned a podcast. Can you mention that one again, the one that you recommend for everyone to listen to, that podcast episode?
Yeah, so I don't remember the number, but it's on Danny Jones's podcast,
Okay.
which is on YouTube, Spotify. The uncensored version of that, though, is on his Patreon. It's behind like
Okay.
a $5 paywall. I highly recommend that because the parts that got censored out are really important. And that was Dr. Jack Cruz's episode. I think it was like 3 or 4 episodes ago by now. It was like a couple weeks ago that he posted it. So I'd highly recommend that for like the history of medicine and medical tyranny in our culture, and then also an intro to light biology and how light is just really important for shaping health and disease. And so I think people will just be absolutely kind of enraptured with that conversation. I personally think it was the most important podcast ever recorded. And I don't say that lightly because I've listened to thousands of podcasts, but that one is like, if everybody in the world could hear one podcast, that would be the one.
Gotcha. And if there's a dad listening to this episode, they literally love what you're saying and they're ready to take the next step. Obviously, the first step is to reach out to Dr. Alexis, but 3 other steps for the next 21 days for them to commit to. What would you tell them to focus on?
Yeah, so whenever you wake up, first thing, go see the sun. Ideally, that can be at sunrise, but if not, whatever time it is, just get out and get that natural light into your eyes first thing. Then prioritize getting at least 10 minutes minimum of midday sun, especially on your abdomen and on your calves. Those are the most efficient places to get sun exposure from a POMC and like a neuroendocrine perspective. So just, if you can get out on a lunch break even and like take your shirt off and just get your bare feet on the ground somewhere for 10, 15 minutes. If you can get, if you have darker skin, it needs to be a little bit longer ideally, but whatever you can do is better than nothing. And then starting around sunset, you want to block blue light, getting a high quality pair of blue blocking glasses. And or if you can just change the light bulbs in your house and use screen filters, then you can do that instead. But a lot of people will want to use blue blockers because they're a little bit easier. Just make sure they're the high quality dark orange lens pair. And those would be the 3 steps I would say everybody needs to start with. And once you do that, you'll start to feel benefits and you'll want to be curious about like, what else can I do or how can I take this to the next level? And then, you can learn about that from my page or your wife's page or my ebook and other resources out there that can really help move the needle in the right direction. But ultimately, it's very, very simple, mostly free. And the benefits are just like, I can't overstate them. It's just completely changed my life in so many ways.
Okay. And advice to a dad athlete or a mom athlete that is training at an elite level, but they're more fatigued than normal. What advice would you give them?
Yeah, so I mean, you have to prioritize your circadian health because that darkness at night it's a non-negotiable from a recovery and a regeneration perspective. So if you're feeling really run down, it's likely that either you're not getting enough sleep, the quality of your sleep is low, or both. And so making sure that you're very diligent about darkness in your bedroom environment at night. So that means no TV on, no night lights. That means if you have indicator lights on any electronics, put electrical tape over them. That means if there's any street lights outside your window, using blackout curtains to block out that light, and really getting that pitch black environment for your sleep is going to be crucial, as well as wearing those blue blockers starting at sunset. You need to get that blue light free nighttime environment in order to get the proper regenerative and recovery response that you need in order to perform at a high level during the day. So that would be number one thing, is optimizing that darkness and that sleeping environment, making sure it's cool enough as well. And then during the day, it's like really the same stuff. It's like seeing sunrise, it's getting midday sun, and it's training outside whenever possible, because that's going to mitigate the wear and tear on your body. It's going to allow you to push yourself even more while also getting the recovery and the regenerative capacity that you need in order to not sustain injuries, for example.
Love it. Love it. Thank you so much for coming on, Dr. Alexis. And hang on for a second here. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Hey fellas, thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please share it with others, post about it on your social media, or leave a rating and a review. You can also shoot me a direct email to competitiveedge2023@gmail.com. To catch all the latest from me, you can follow me on Instagram at Daniel Hickman26. Thanks again, and I'll talk to you soon. Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. Have you noticed we upgraded the podcast episode images recently? These images just pop more and look really clean now. We are proud to be partnered with Schizz Graffix. The owner, James, has a strong passion in bringing images to life with his unique graphic skills while offering fast delivery and flexibility. He works with brands that we know and trust, like Obstacle Race Media, Rally in the Valley, Protein 2.0, Wad Zombie, Grit Games, Riverbend CBD, Lids, CrossFit, and more. The type of projects Schizz Graffix takes on are nameplates for CrossFit competitions, company logos, social media athlete announcements and podium image edits, YouTube and podcast art like this one, and custom trading cards. Schizz Graphics is easy to reach and ready to help your business or athletes stand out. Send your next edit request directly to James on IG at schizz.graphics, which is SCHIZZ.graphics, GRAFFIX. And a big thank you to Schizz Graphics for supporting the Competitive Edge podcast. We appreciate your commitment to helping hybrid racers and businesses stand out with your art skills. And to our listeners, we encourage you to support Schizz Graphics and give them a try. Send an edit or two their way. Don't forget to subscribe to the Competitive Edge podcast and leave us a review.